Hello and welcome to another episode of Interlinked, a podcast by the Center for New Economic Studies at OP Jindal Global University. Interlinked delves into the complex, interdisciplinary challenges shaping our world today. Through in depth discussions on the evolving socio political landscape, we aim to break down intellectual barriers and examine key issues from multiple legal and policy perspectives. As a part of our focus on international law, in this session, we will discuss the intersection between humanitarianism, advocacy, film, and international law. We are delighted to have with us Mr. Stefan Ziegler. Mr. Ziegler is a humanitarian advocate with 25 years of experience, including work with the UNRWA, International Committee of the Red Cross, OSCE, and the EU. He's also an award winning documentary filmmaker using film to engage global audiences on international law and humanitarian diplomacy through advocacy productions. His documentary Broken is now a part of university curricula worldwide, and his latest film, The Mandate, continues this mission. Thank you so much for speaking with us. It's a pleasure to have you here.
I think the pleasure is more on my side. And as I said, I'm always surprised how people find me in such a large, multi-dimensional cultural world of ours. And especially, I think, for the right reasons, because I do believe my experience does contribute to the four areas that you just mentioned. So thank you for that.
Thank you. For the first question, we'll start by talking about your experience as a humanitarian practitioner. You've had first-hand experience in Palestine and Ukraine, where you've seen the kind of suffering that people are going through. Could you share some key moments or challenges that you faced and what these have taught you about your ideals of justice, injustice, and accountability within the frameworks of international law?
I'm laughing now because if I had to list those key moments, I think we'll be here for another few days, okay? I'm not saying this necessarily just flippantly. I'm saying that because I think when I started 25 years ago, the world looked different. I'm not talking about the entire globe and so on. I'm talking about the world of humanitarianism, the world of international law, filmmaking, I don't know. But certainly these areas had a much more sophisticated way of being interpreted, meaning they were much more applicable to all actors in conflict, but also outside, and I include peace movements and academia and so on, and that has shifted. And so what I learned in my first few years probably doesn't have a lot of impact anymore on even on my own thinking. But I think one of the most dramatic moments, I think, in my life, and I'm not talking about individual conflicts and people suffering. I think we don't need this. We have this on social media. But what stands out to me is the first time I realized that humanitarianism is also an instrument for politics, finance, economics, all sorts of things, history, you name it. I think the word is instrumentalization. It has been instrumentalized more and more. I think maybe I was naive to believe that you would actually be able to simply go and help in situations where people couldn't help themselves. But I soon find out, I think that's really the message I would like to impart with you, because it also has bearing on film and everything else that I'm doing now, is the fact that I realized to give Band-Aid, and I'm not talking about Band-Aid, the festival, I'm talking about the Band-Aid that you stick on some body part that you cut and so on. Humanitarianism is actually not quite simply to assist people, and this is what we see on TV. This is how UNICEF and all the others are getting their finances in. They see, kids that are crying, and then they see a big parcel arriving with a brand name on it. It could be the EU, it could be somebody else, and I very soon said to myself, this can't be it. that anybody can do. You don't need somebody with capacity that I've acquired to continue giving out food parcels and stuff. In fact, in one of the agencies that I worked with, and it's really immaterial, we handed out food parcels decades after a conflict had come to rest. And we were simply substituting, I think this is the word here, we were simply substituting the local authorities, those people that were really in charge of all of this, and they're all described in international law. So I think that hasn't changed very much, that we neglect the laws that we've actually written for ourselves as humanity. And so my niche, I think, and it then ended up in my company's name, is to do advocacy, which is exactly not acting, but, well, of course we're acting too, but taking a plight and intelligently, some of them are not doing that quite the way, but using this intelligently to put pressure in some ways, or at least understanding of the side that may be the stronger side. So you could put this into any conflict situation. In fact, you can put this into any social situation. And that's where this whole idea of advocacy for me became very strong. And luckily, I'm not a legal expert. I think I have a very different background. I'm a sociologist and so on. But the word advocacy, although it sounds a bit cheesy after all these years, is really giving voice to the voiceless. And I'm saying cheesy because everybody's now using it and stuff. But I think it's still the best way to describe it. It is not necessarily giving them whatever it is, but using the position of the humanitarian, who is usually, of course, not a national or anybody related to either conflict side. So we can uphold neutrality and independence in a much different way than somebody, obviously, that has local affiliation, has a religion maybe that doesn't fit in with the other side. All of these things. And I think that really stuck. The idea of using this potential of somebody from the outside, but with the capacity to rationalize certain things and make it palatable to other people. And the first time it really stuck was when I negotiated a local ceasefire for a few hours to get water into a refugee camp. And it worked. And it's not easy, but it only works if you don't take side. And I think that's the wonderful part of advocacy and the way I see my work, including my film work.
Continuing on from that idea, could you elaborate more on your idea of action advocacy and specifically how documentaries also play a role in driving change on, say, social, political, and legal issues?
Yeah, I don't know. It's a few years ago that me and my associates or affiliates, of whom there are so many, I can't count them. There are so many people worldwide that are wanting to change and positive change. And they find me a bit like you did, right? So through LinkedIn or whatever the case may be. And I think maybe 5 years ago or so, it might be a project proposal for a film or a project proposal for some kind of a project that we wanted to establish. I said to my colleagues, I am no longer satisfied with the word advocacy in itself. Everybody's using it. You can now study it at university. And I said, no, you can't study. It's like, it's like, no, you can't. You can learn about certain techniques and stuff. But I think it's a certain personality. It's life experience. It's having open eyes and an open mind. And that you can't teach somebody, not immediately. It's a process, okay? So when they search an advocacy expert at 25 years of age, because they don't have to pay them at 25, then it's just going, okay, I think you would be better off without, okay? Because that won't work. Maybe a bit cynical about this, but I've seen the term advocacy, change so much that now it's like, yeah, it's like the media, the communications officers, the finance officers, it's the donor relations people. It becomes a bit, tacky after a while. And so I suggested that day that we should switch to calling it, at least for us internally, action advocacy. Because advocacy in itself, a lot of people, as you probably know, also through your studies and so on, they think advocacy is when you probably prepare a podcast, for example. That's only a communications tool. What you do with the podcast afterwards, that might become an advocacy tool, but you need to know a little bit about what you want to achieve with the messaging and all of this. Otherwise, it just stays a nice little film podcast, whatever. Okay, and I hope we'll be able to give you a little bit of a kickstart in this. Okay, but action advocacy is obviously linked to something that you do because you're conscious of it. You don't just do it because, well, I'm an advocacy officer, so they give me $25,000 a year, and for any organization, I do some advocacy. It's the action comes first. What is it you want to achieve? How? And it's not the communication that achieves it. It's the change of mind in those people that you're trying to advocate for somebody else, obviously, those people without or with much less of a voice. And the second part, and I think this is a really nice way of being able to introduce this also, which is a methodology that I use. Some call it a theory, whatever it is. Okay, it's a research tool. It's called action research, and without going too much into detail, I think the biggest difference between action research in the social sciences, obviously, and maybe other types, is that you are part of it. You're not abstracting yourself from it. You are identifying yourself, which doesn't mean that you lose your neutrality, but being on the inside of a social change mechanism, a process, has a greater chance of getting you as a researcher to understand why these things are happening and therefore act afterwards. And I think, and I met a lot of amazing people in this world that are adhering to the same type of research methodology. But one branch of that is called, and I think that in the context of what I'm saying now makes a lot of sense to people listening to this. We call it, or it's called, participative action research. So it's even more, so your action is you're participating in the action, but the people in it are participating in your research. And thereby, one big thing happens that in other social scientific methodologies does not really happen at all. You become part of it, therefore, you also become part of the change. So you're no longer abstracting yourself from being in that research with the researchers, calling them, as just mentioned it, them and me. You're now part of that process. And I've done this, I don't know, forever, as far as I can remember, certainly the last 25 years, but I never really knew that that's what I'm doing. So someday, a young researcher from America joined my team in Palestine, And she said, do you actually know what you're doing? And I said, well, that's a very nice question of yours. I said, and she said, no, that's not what I meant. She said, I study at Cornell University in New York State, and I study participative action research. And she says, that's exactly what you're doing. Now, and I know this may be a big jump right now, but I'm saying to you, that moment with this person, with this lovely young woman, changed an awful lot in me. I became conscious of my work more than ever before. And she subsequently invited me, and here I'm not just talking anecdotes, okay, although we could do this for hours afterwards, but I was invited to go for 7 days to Cornell University, where I started teaching this stuff. I was teaching with PhD students, with staff, undergraduates, graduates, you name it, different types of role plays. I mean, you name it, okay? Writing courses and so on. So I would say I was probably there for about 10 days. And it's the education that's inherent in that work that makes my work slightly different. What I see education as a education, obviously, sorry, as a advocacy drive, and as an activity, an action that should be built into whatever we do. If we do research and it's not for somebody else, okay, that's a bit like, is there light in the fridge when you close the door? Okay, so this is very strongly where I'm coming from, and I'll give the ball back to you. Okay.
So, talking about bridging the gap between them and us, and also about the whole education thing, your film Broken, a Palestinian journey through international law, and also the mandate. How do you think this kind of bridges the gap between the them and the us? And how does it relate to education of international law? What are the connections between these two films that the viewers can take away from it?
Oh, that's a long question. It's okay. Let me think about this. No, because I want to make an intelligent, give you an intelligent answer to this. Okay, first of all, I think it's important when you go to my webpage and where you've seen this, but maybe just to recount this, there is a producer statement for the first film, which needed to be done in order to say why was the film produced, because it's these are films out of the ordinary. They're about international law, and most people don't even know what that is. So we're making films for those, that we're trying, obviously, to get involved and get awareness built and so on. But in that film, I think at the very film, it's 1 minute 40 seconds. Okay, in this clip, it says at the end, if I can't do very much with the film itself, it won't have a direct impact. But I said, and it's very spontaneous. I never thought about that sentence, which I never probably do. So I said, well, if my film strengthens international law, I'd be a very happy man. And that's really the summary of why I made the first film, and why I'm making other film products, and why I just sort of came out with the second film. It's because I think the reach to people with meaningful film is still much higher than what you could achieve through newspaper articles, writing academic books, or whatever, stand on a soapbox and shout it out to the world. But I think, and here I'm coming to the first part of your question, I think it's the involvement of people at all levels, not just the judges and the experts, but other people in the film who took us by the hand to show us what it means for them. And here we're different from a journalist. The journalist has a certain amount of time, obviously they're paid for whatever, per minute or something. They amalgamate stuff, but always from the them side, always from the outside. And then they write about it. Some are extremely good at this, but a journalist is not necessarily somebody who wants to get people to get up and do something about the malheurs in the world. That's different with us. We take as much time as it takes to make a film. None of us is dependent financially on them. Which is a bit of a difficult part, but anyway, we have to we do things in our lives that are either more or less meaningful, and here the fact that people worked inside with us, giving us the understanding for what's happening, including the judges, and I'll come back to that when we talk about the mandate, means when we show the film, people are the same as the ones that helped us out, because the questions would be the same. So people identify with the inherent stuff of that of those film productions, which normally they wouldn't. I mean, an international law film is but like, what? No, I want to enjoy my evening with popcorn and a beer or something like that. And I think that's the beauty about this action research and participative action research. You're asking the right questions. You're not asking the questions with somebody that has a prior knowledge about something, because none of us were lawyers. Well, of course, we had some people afterwards that helped us, but none of us had a legal background, including myself. I may have a background in seeing where legality or legal issues in humanitarian context doesn't work, but generally speaking, we were all fresh. And I think that's probably, is for you guys to judge, not for me. But I think that's where the interests, of ordinary people come out. And I think this is a very nice way of introducing my latest film, because when we made the first film, it took 4 years. The 3 judges, actually the ones that you see here, okay, those 3 judges took about 1.5 years on average each to figure out why or what would they actually take part in a film that shows their, well, the secrets, if you wish, the secrets of their job. As I say in the film, you will hear a judge say something and then they close the case. And then after that, judges don't usually speak about it anymore, because what's there to add? They've already said everything. They did everything. But we realized when they thought about it and when we had them on camera roll, and a lot of it is in archive still, they actually talked to us for another reason. It wasn't because they needed to, to show their egos or something like that. They're way beyond this. They were talking to us, we believe, because they were not satisfied with the outcome, the political one. No, I'm not talking about the judicial one, but the political outcome through the UN system, the international community. In fact, they're the ones letting us down. We have great laws. I think they cover most of the problems nowadays. Even there's maybe some specializations that we need to uncover. But generally speaking, I think the humanitarian law is very, very well elaborated, but not adhered to, and that's the problem. And so, in the mandate, we're looking at how does the learning about international law function, and we hope that it'll be understood that what we're trying to achieve is giving mandate in terms of a film company, if you wish, to those people. At the end of that film, they are represented by a webinar. So it's the common people, everybody that was filmed for that had their own say about international law. There was no script, obviously. It's a documentary and so on. And hopefully, now that the film is out, and we're hoping to get, we get this distributed widely, we hope that people realize we actually own international law, not the judges and the law books and so on and so forth. All right.
Thank you. Connecting to your last point about how it's actually the people who own international law, looking at contemporary events, how do you think the international community's responsibility to protect human rights is that being impacted in an adverse manner? And how do you think we can kind of move past this to brighter fields?
A lot of people that we talk to, and in making films like these, you realize that when you start out with a common sense term such as international community, and I think the more we turn into a very strange part of our history, that term is, I think it's I don't think it's really justified anymore. Because yes, it's nice to say, we, the nations of the world appeal to the, international community to do something about this. I think the best answer I got from the former president of the ICJ, the International Court of Justice, Professor and Judge Yusuf, he said, the dissemination now cannot be of international law, can no longer be just to representatives of states, including diplomats. That's another story that I think we need to revisit. I think it's such an antiquated idea, but we can't change the whole world in one go, although some people believe that. But he says we have to do this. We have to give this down to the international community, to civil society, basically. I think civil society is a better term because it reverberates much better with human rights. Yes, what is civil society? No, we know what civil society is. But of course, at least when we say civil society, we don't mean states. So I think that's very helpful already in many ways. And the interests of states inherently, they're so Machiavellian. Why would they change a system that suits them? That's the cynical part of what I learned through my work, okay? And I think if we veer away from adhering our ideas to elites, and I think international law as a field is an elitist approach. Very few people, and I don't want to go into details here right now, but very few people in that elite, the big schools of international law and the courts and so on, have actually taken the subject down to the people, civil society, call it whatever. And this is probably where I got more gray hair than at any other time in my life. But we actually started a project a long time ago. It was the same time I realized what advocacy and film means. But this project here it's not so much about film. Of course, the film in it is a way of teaching, creating awareness and stuff. But the project itself is looking at, if we want international law to be upheld, it has to start at an early age, the realization that there is such a thing. I mean, you ask parents, teachers, and they say, yeah, international, yeah, I hear about it on the news, but it doesn't mean anything to them. Literally, they have no clue what this is about, okay? There's very few, which I think is sad. So we started a project that we're creating a film material for educational purposes that will allow to teach 14-year-olds with the same films that we make, but we just adjust our own way of directing them through participative action research. The resultant film out of this is called The Curious. So the curious, at 14, they soak it all up. And they will never forget this, because that's just the way the brain is structured at that age. They may not understand exactly what it is, but we help them through this project to understand through film and activities with teachers. And maybe just to close on this question with the following point. I don't think many people in law have actually thought about this. We have had to teach, now this is, I mean, insane if you think about it. We had to teach secondary teachers how to teach international law without a background in it. But the outcome was wonderful. And including, we had people from India in this project and from various other nations, 20 nations in total. And now we think we have a communications tool, a film, that allows young people to at least gather some of the intricacies of international law, the difficulties with it, difficulties to understand why do we have a UN if, if only like those people that have a veto can say what they want and so on. And all of that has been, has been elaborated, and we're almost finished with this project. I think that's really important.
Thank you so much for sharing the project with us. And continuing in the same vein, could you tell us more about your interest in having India particularly disseminate your film in, say, festivals and academies?
I greatly believe in call it opportunism. It's not opportunism in a negative sense, but something stands out, and then you cannot undo a thought anymore, or an image of somebody. Somebody that you like, you will not unlike in your head, but maybe that person does something, and then you move on. But the same with India, it's a very big concept, okay? But I think I had more Indian students working with me than from any other nation. Although I've never been to India, not yet anyway, and I have very little knowledge about it. Well, if have never been there, it's just the way it is. Of course, there's a lot of things that I've read about it and so on. But these young people that I had working with me, and one young lady from New Delhi who started working with me. I mean, we met on LinkedIn. She's still this morning I just had an exchange with her for some particular reason, and I think that's 6 years after we first met. And she was a young student, so she was doing her bachelor's first and so on. Then she ended up doing a master's in SOAS in London. And, if you don't know somebody from India, it's very hard to know whether what the idea is. But because I've had so many really good experiences, I even expressed interest in maybe teaching in India at some stage. Maybe there's a very small little anecdote also. This is kind of cute, okay? I think I was about 6 years of age, and my parents hosted a teacher from Mumbai. Yeah, I'm not so sure anymore. That's very long time ago. But her name was, see, this is terrible. Anyway, she came to live with us. It was an NGO called Experimental Living or something. So people could live in each other's countries, not necessarily the same families, and get a chance to see the country without much financial burden and so on. And yeah, I think I was always so fascinated by this lady with her, colorful robes and all that there was about it. I remember she gave me these little beans that were full of little elephants made from ivory and so on, and it's like it's always fascinated me. And since then, I think this is probably something that's in the back of my head, and it is that what I'm calling opportunism. If this had happened with somebody from, I don't know, China or somewhere else, it would probably have a different connotation now. So there is reasons for it. Okay.
We have to conclude our discussion here. We honestly really thank you so much for these insights that you've offered. And it's really inspiring, at least from my perspective, and I'm sure everyone watching will agree, to listen to someone who's so passionate about their cause. Thank you so much for sharing your insights and for sharing your experience with us. It
Sure.
was an honor to have you here.
Thank you, Shivali. Thank you so much.